Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation with changemakers working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. The future of modern life, our lifestyles, turns in large part on making the packaging and delivery of food and products that we buy sustainable and eventually even environmentally neutral or positive. Our guest today is Robert Lilienfeld, the Executive Director of SPRING, the Sustainable Packaging Research, Information, and Networking Group. It's a Denver-based think tank that provides expert advice and commentary on creating sustainable and regenerative product packaging. SPRING's approach to packaging is pragmatic and driven by a dedication to dialogue that's based on transparency and respect for everyone in the discussion, whether they agree with one another or not. Bob leads an influential conversation on LinkedIn that I think is going to help us work our way through to a solution to our packaging problems. Too often, battle lines are drawn in the sustainability debate, and while there are clear lines that define what's harmful to the environment or what constitutes greenwashing, the path to a sustainable future has to lead through the no man's land that separates us from opportunities to collaborate to take steps forward. So enough table setting. Let's dive into the deep waters of sustainable packaging and talk with Bob about it. You can learn more about Spring and Bob at springpack.net. Springpack's all one word, no space, no dash, springpack.net. Welcome to the show, Bob. How are you doing today?
I'm a little chilly, but doing okay. Thanks.
Well, thank you for weathering the storm in Colorado to talk to us. You've been working in the packaging industry for more than 30 years. Tell us what Spring's definition of sustainable packaging is, and how do you work to spread that gospel?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that we don't believe there's any such thing as a sustainable package. Okay. In and of itself, packages are not sustainable or unsustainable without first looking at what it is that they're designed to do. And in general, they're designed to first contain something and then protect it, and then to ensure that the product that's being purchased is delivered to the ultimate user in the condition in which the user expects it to be delivered. So it's the package that delivers 100% of the value of the product that it contains and does that in the least unsustainable way, i.e. in the most environmental and economically efficient way, is the most sustainable package. And when you look at things that way, you don't really have any preconceived notions about what materials that package ought to be made of. Give me my product in the condition that I paid for and do it in the most environmentally efficient way. And generally, the way we define that is the least amount of greenhouse gas generation.
Okay, so there are a lot of implications to what you just said, but let me ask this. What do you tell companies about the value of making the effort to become more sustainable and informing customers about their choices? How do you make this relevant to them?
You have to start at the top of an organization. And generally the people at the top have the least understanding of what sustainability is really all about. And the first question you ask is the one that seems so simple, but nobody ever asks it, which is, let's talk about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Define how you define your what's your definition of sustainability, and how do you expect to get there, and why do you think that's the most important way to go? And if you don't have that discussion at the top, you can't create a channel by which you can communicate with all of the employees in an organization. Because I guarantee you, if you ask 3 people in any organization what sustainability means, you're going to get 6 different opinions. And so you really have to have that definition, because I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the person wrapping pallets on the floor, or a polymer chemist, or somebody working in a kitchen. Unless you understand what the company is trying to accomplish from a sustainability perspective, you're not going to know if your efforts are actually meaningful or not. And by not having a goal, you cannot be incentivized for trying to reach it.
It's, that brings up so many different issues. Internal communications is critical, and innovation often comes from a lot of unexpected places within an organization, but only if they're activated towards a particular goal, like you're saying. But then on the other hand, there's the consumer out there thinking about what they buy and how it's packaged. How do you characterize the key factors in designing a package that's more sustainable, so that whether I'm working on the line, I'm working as the engineer, the chemical engineer on the packaging material, or the consumer, I can think about the trade-offs. What do I need to understand?
There are lots of trade-offs, and uh, because nothing's perfect. It's a very complex system, and um, the trade-offs are the areas where management ought to be involved from a decision-making perspective. But again, those trade-offs can only be analyzed if you've set an objective. Um, and so, rightly or wrongly, if your objective is you want to minimize greenhouse gas generation, and there's no such thing as net zero. Okay, the universe doesn't work that way. The second law of thermodynamics cannot be denied. It cannot be avoided. Waste is going to be created. So if we assume that waste is going to be created, then it's the job of the sustainability group, if you will, and management to determine which waste is most acceptable. So now we get into the trade-offs.
Right.
Solid waste versus greenhouse gases. I would argue that solid waste, a landfill is a carbon sink in a way. So if not generating greenhouse gases means that something would be landfilled, now you got to look at two things. One is the environmental cost, and the second is the economic cost of landfilling versus remediation of greenhouse gas generation. And so it's basically, let's be honest, it's a cost accounting issue, but it's a cost accounting issue in a way that's never been described as such.
Well, we can measure things like emissions that we never even thought about until 20 to 50 years ago. But in addition to being a carbon sink, a place where carbon ends up being stored, emissions are produced by a landfill. Should we also be thinking about sustainability in packaging in the context of the material becoming a future nutrient for nature, or alternatively a fuel that we could burn in industry? It's about trade-offs, as you said. Where do you start when you want to make a decision about that long-term goal? Let's say my objective is to lower my company's greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, so there's a number of places where you start. The first is where's the low-hanging fruit? Mm-hmm. And the low-hanging fruit is not in packaging. The low-hanging fruit is in your heating and cooling system, mm-hmm. and however it is that you're powering your equipment. I mean, those two things probably account for a minimum of 80% of your energy generation. So insulating, more efficient equipment, switching away from fossil fuel generation of electricity. I mean, those are all the first steps. The packaging issue it's more of a consumer issue or it's a policy issue. It's not really a business issue. A lot of people aren't going to agree with me, but in many cases, the packaging that consumers believe is the most egregious is not, or it's egregious in ways that people where trade-offs occur. So if you say plastic packaging is bad, the science says that if you're looking at greenhouse gas generation, plastic packaging is not bad. If you're looking at creating waste, uncaptured waste, whether it's heading to marine environments or whatever, there's an issue there. So we don't have any government objectives, and I think this is a problem. That there's no overall government objectives that state the primary thing we need to avoid is greenhouse gas generation. And we want to do that, and then you can add, we want to do that with a minimum amount of stuff that ends up in oceans or landfills or whatever. So at least then there's an order that you can pursue. Right now there isn't, and I'm an ex Procter and Gamble brand manager. I got my MBA from Northwestern in marketing. Okay, so that's my background. And from a marketing standpoint, perception is reality. If consumers tell me they want my packaging to be recyclable, that's what I'm going to look at. But and that's where the decisions have to be made. Who gets to determine whether or not your objective is to meet consumer expectations, regardless of whether those expectations are right or wrong, and where do you draw that line, and what are you going to do to communicate if you don't meet their expectations that whatever it is you're doing may actually be better. And that's where things get really tough for two reasons. One, it's a very hard thing to communicate.
Sure.
And the other is that in general, most consumers really don't care. They're not reading labels. They're not making decisions on whether or not a package contains 30 or 35% post-consumer material. And brand managers know this. I mean, a package is real estate. And the most valuable real estate you own is the piece in the middle that faces the consumer. When you look at information like RDA information or even environmental information, it's on the other side of the tracks. There are consumers who want to see it, but in general, consumers don't. So you're faced with a double problem of alerting or educating consumers about what you're doing, and that's piece A, and piece B is actually making a difference in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. And everybody blames, let's say Coke or Pepsi or P&G or Colgate. They're not in the packaging business. And my message constantly to PET suppliers and paperboard suppliers is you're only going to be successful with your customers as long as you meet their functional and economic needs. If you can't do that, whatever you're doing environmentally is almost irrelevant, and that you need to be responsible for your own messaging.
Now, you wrote in an editorial in Packaging Europe recently that the plastics industry must adapt to consumer demands for sustainable packaging or die, which it sounds like you believe there is some urgency about that. But what would that adoption look like if it were successful? How would plastic packaging change?
Much more of it would be bio-based.
Okay.
For consumer perspective. I know whether or not, and I'm not saying that bio-based PET is any different or quote better than fossil fuel-based PET. But if the numbers say that producing a material from a bio base means that it uses less, it produces less greenhouse gases, and it's renewable, then that's the first step. And the second step is wherever possible, you should be using recycled materials. Ideally, those recycled materials are actually chemically recycled because you're basically creating virgin materials. So a lot of this is still theory. I mean, people think chemical recycling is new. It's been around for 50 or 60 years. The real question is whether or not it can be made economically viable.
Are you
And
seeing signs that that is going to happen? Because we've talked with a number of these companies, and all of them are still very tentative about their economic viability.
that's true. But here's the problem with economic viability. Um, Gasoline is economically viable today because government subsidizes its production.
Massively, to trillions of dollars a year globally. Yeah.
Right. Ethanol is economically viable because of the USDA subsidizes corn production.
Mm-hmm.
So if we really wanted to make chemical recycling viable, we could do it. The question is who has the political will to create the economic structure to make it happen. So, on the one side, there's a potential for subsidies. On the other side, there's potential for taxes. Um, a lot of this is doable, and countries outside of the U.S. are able to do this for a variety of reasons. One is they're smaller, so there isn't this vast amount of real estate that needs to be controlled.
Mm-hmm.
The second reason is RCRA, in that right now, solid waste management decisions are made by 20,000 solid waste management districts.
Right.
That's their job. Um, that situation doesn't exist in France. It doesn't, or Singapore, or
Sure.
South Africa. So there, we're behind the times. That's the only way I can think of it is we created a system that got us to where we are economically, and don't seem to be willing to deal with how to maintain that economic value without basically destroying ourselves.
Well, and I think you're hitting on an important point, which is we're locked into an infrastructure that is no longer fitted to the times, and that is, of course, why Earth911 exists, is to try to keep track of all this recycling information for people, because those 20,000 solid waste districts all have different approaches to this. Really important conversation. I want to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. We're back to continue the conversation with the executive director of the Sustainable Packaging Research, Information, and Networking Group, or SPRING, Bob Lilienfeld. Bob, you've made clear that we could build an infrastructure that would allow us to reprocess a lot of our materials, compost all these materials. Do you see extended producer responsibility laws, which are being rolled out in some American states, as a basis for financing a different and circular economy?
Maybe. It has yet to prove itself as a concept. There is no place on this planet, either whether in Europe or Canada, where you can definitively say that EPR makes the difference and provides the value that people expect of it. There's a form of EPR that we know works, and it's called deposit laws. Mm-hmm. Yep. I would be more interested in seeing the states that don't have deposit laws to do so before we start worrying about EPR. And part of the problem with EPR is it's basically a giant pool of money that governments are not controlling. They're allowing basically the companies that produce these materials to control how this money is used. So politics enters into it virtually immediately. The second thing is there's no signal to the consumer as to what it is they ought to be doing. It's and really we have to start there. I mean, to me, the value of circularity is not simply the materials that we collect. It's the links in the chain,
right,
that are right now linear, and those links need to be circular. So the people who have no relationship to consumers are the material suppliers and the converters. And that needs to be closed. And there needs to be more of a relationship between the international papers and the Dows and consumers, so that there's a direct sense of responsibility. I had a discussion about 2 years ago with one of the largest polymer companies in the world, who brought me in to talk about chemical recycling and how valuable it is or could be. And I said, so what are you doing to collect this material? They said, oh, that's not our job.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. But let me ask the question in a slightly different way then. What percentage of a company's revenue from a product could be successfully applied to making that product circular? And I've asked a lot of CEOs and guests over the years about this, and it's usually between 1 and 1.5%. What's your opinion?
I would have said 1 to 2%, for a couple of reasons. First, for a major global CPG, that's a fair amount of money.
Yeah.
The second thing is you can raise prices to cover that if need be, and depending on the companies, such as especially in healthcare and beauty aids and fashion, there's plenty of margin for 1 or 2% to be used in a manner that isn't currently expected. There's usually slush at the bottom line when companies do their planning. There's what's called brand available, which is a gross margin that's unaccounted for. So it can happen.
Do you see signs that companies recognizing that there is a desire amongst consumers who are expressing this more and more, that their products be recyclable, the package being recyclable, or that it's circular in some way? Do you see them taking that to heart and starting to think about making the change in the way they allocate resources so that they do pay for recapturing stuff, or is it just going to not be their job forever?
That's a really good question, and I would say there are some companies that do. Generally, the ones that do are European companies, because they have a fairly different attitude towards government. I'll throw some names out there. I'd say Nestle and Unilever are more likely to go along with government mandates and assume that that's their job than in the United States. Our sense of social contract between business and society is broken, I think. So it used to be, if you read what every Delaware chartered company has agreed to, it states pretty clearly, if not very clearly, that the companies exist at the behest of the government and the people, and that if the company does things that are socially detrimental, they can lose their charter. Mm-hmm. It's never happened, and someday some lawyer who's smarter than me will go back and say, hey, there's already remediative capability within the existing legal infrastructure to make companies more responsive. But in general, it's look at what's happened with the whole ESG situation, which basically people are moving away from. Now it's DEI, but when it was ESG and BlackRock came out and said we're seriously looking at this, the pushback was enormous. So once these things get beyond simply we're going to do this and we're going to tell people we're doing the right thing, and they actually have to do the right thing, that's when things start to get serious. And no company has yet, that I'm aware of, has yet been punished for not doing what they said they were going to do, because there are no real government guidelines by which to do it. And companies only exist I mean, I don't want to say only exist, but the primary reason they exist is to make money. And therefore, if you cannot monetize the impact of doing the right thing, then many, if not most companies aren't going to pay much attention to it.
Well, in a lot of ways, the ESG movement was simply a recognition that we can measure things that we couldn't before. And I think it's important, and we've had guests on that have talked about this, that investors be able to see the risk that we are creating by not cleaning up our mess in a variety of senses, environmental, social, and in terms of our transparency as organizations. But let me ask you about how the system could change. Is the single stream recycling system that we have today the right foundation for what we need to build, or do we need a more distributed, in other words, lots of different streams for specialized materials processing?
I think we need different streams. Originally, I was a big pay-as-you-throw proponent for single stream. And the reason is that at the time it was created, the objective was not recycling. It was landfill diversion.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it was very successful. I moved to Boulder 10 years ago, and from Michigan, and the percentage of stuff that the amount of trash that I sent to landfills was reduced by about 60%, or so I thought. So, but as we all know, that's not really the case, because once that pay as you throw single stream container is actually run through a MRF, a lot of it's going to a landfill.
Yeah.
So really, the only way to do this successfully is to yank out the stuff that can be recycled, and to reward consumers for doing so. So, for example, this example isn't going to be particularly applicable in the suburbs of the United States, but I just came back from a week in France in a little village called Montflacin, which is in southern France. And you are not allowed to do anything with your trash, your non-recyclable trash, unless you buy a key fob. And you take your trash and you go to the little recycling center or the trash center, and you run your key fob over the trash bin, and it reads your key fob and knows who you are and opens up, and you can throw away your non-recyclable trash. And you pay for that. You can then very easily sort your paperboard, your plastic packaging, both your plastic packaging, your paperboard, and in some cases, compostable material, organic material.
Right.
That's free.
So economic incentives can certainly play a part in this. One of the things you mentioned earlier about the purpose of the package is to get it to the consumer in the form they want it to be. But of course, we used to go shopping a lot more. And now at least 20%, if not more, of our shopping is happening online, which no longer requires, for instance, the plastic clamshell that keeps you from stealing the item from the retail location. Is rethinking our distribution system, recognizing that we now have this more direct-to-consumer opportunity, a way for us to rethink packaging so we could strip away all of that extra stuff that used to protect it in a different context? Is that a better way forward?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Initially, 20 years ago, CPGs, manufacturers, whatever, said, it's not big enough. We can't afford to create separate packaging for e-commerce. That's no longer the case. And I don't know a single CPG that isn't doing specialized packaging for e-commerce, either in terms of how they secondarily package their material to go through an e-commerce warehouse, or how that package gets broken down for consumers. The main difference that has to be taken into account is when you go into a store and you see a package on the shelf, you recognize, oh, that's the product I buy. I mean, that package has been, I'll say, optimized in terms of its messaging, both its brand messaging, functional messaging, et cetera, et cetera. When you buy something online, the package that you see is what you see on the Amazon, for example, on their website. That's what you're buying, that image. And in general, that image ought to look like what it looks like in a grocery store. So you need consistent imaging there. And when you open that package at home, the only way you can be sure that you're getting what you think you're getting is if that image is aligned with the image on their website or in the retail store. But of course, that doesn't mean you can't get rid of a blister pack or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, ideally, the e-commerce could provide a more, let's say, sustainable packaging opportunity for consumers. There are things, for example, retail packaging the product needs to stand up on the shelf. If it falls off, you got a problem. It needs to be secondarily packaged in a way that it isn't going to break or whatever. So you can do different things for e-commerce because the supply chain looks different. And again, you can be more efficient as long as the consumer feels that what they're buying is what they expected to buy. You have all sorts of latitude.
Well, okay, but so that's a design ethos associated with supporting a series of one-off purchase decisions. You go to the store, you see stuff on the shelf, you go, oh, I want that again. I need more of this cereal. But with e-commerce and our ability to subscribe to stuff now, which I do across a bunch of different product categories, we could also simply redesign the entire experience and eliminate a lot of the packaging because I know I'm always going to get that dog food or I'm always going to get this product, whatever it might be. Is that something we should be rethinking more comprehensively? And could companies embrace that as a way both to create greater consumer loyalty relationships and reduce their impact?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a question, sort of a setup. It's already starting to happen in Europe. There is potential legislation it hasn't been passed, but it probably will, that talks about reducing secondary packaging by 15 to 20%. It doesn't define what secondary packaging is. So let's say you're in the toothpaste business. And right now, your toothpaste tube goes into a box. And it goes into the box for two reasons. The first is so that it's shelf stable and it's easy to pack out and it's easy to handle. And because the box provides significantly more surface area for you to message and alert consumers.
Right.
There are people saying, well, you know what? That's a secondary package. Let's just get rid of those. Why can't the toothpaste tube just, stand on the shelf? Well, it can. You have to redesign the cap. Yeah. But it's never going to provide the merchandising value that the box provides. On an e-commerce basis, the box may be irrelevant. So if e-commerce is a significant enough amount of your business, then you can rethink that packaging. And it's not just the packaging. It could be the size. I mean, you might say, we're not going to sell 1.4 ounce toothpaste through e-commerce. We're going to sell 3-ounce toothpaste. And the reason is because the tube is going to be bigger and provides us with more merchandising opportunity. But frankly, we no longer need the box. So there are all sorts of ways to think about this. And again, it comes back to what is it you're trying to accomplish? And you're trying to provide the consumer with the most absolute and perceived value with the least amount of waste. And that doing that may have a different solution in the e-commerce world than the physical bricks and mortar world.
Bob, this is an incredibly pragmatic conversation and been very valuable. I want to thank you for taking time with us today. How can folks follow your work?
It's actually very simple. You either go to the website, which is springpack, springpack.net, or most of our communications is done through my LinkedIn site. And I would say that's probably the best thing to do is find me, and it's Robert Lilienfeld on LinkedIn, and you'll automatically, if you participate, you'll be part of virtually all of our discussions, and you will be talking with some of the world's experts on polymer science, packaging, food waste, you name it.
Thank you very much, Bob, for spending time with us today.
My pleasure. I'd love to do it again.
I look forward to it. We've been talking with Bob Lilienfeld. He's the Executive Director of Spring. That's the Sustainable Packaging Research, Information, and Networking Group. And you can learn more about Spring and Bob by visiting springpack.net. Also check him out on LinkedIn. The sustainable economy is going to be built by many innovations that are going to come together that make products and packaging more recyclable, compostable, and reusable. As Bob made clear, the design of packaging, of course, is just one step in realizing circularity. We also need investments in collection and processing infrastructure, as well as accessible, useful information to help each of us put materials to continued use efficiently and, of course, easily. And perhaps the model he described in France, where painfully clear economic incentives reinforce the value of recycling or composting, can contribute to the solution. But the first and most critical decision each of us needs to make is to demand from companies that they make packaging and products that are better for the environment. And if consumers don't make clear their preference for sustainable options, that corporate change isn't going to happen. Bob, like many of our guests, estimates that the cost of putting a circular system in place is between 1% and 2% of the price of a product. But that cost doesn't all need to be borne by the consumer alone. Even if it is easy to raise prices, getting rid of packaging, such as the box in which a toothpaste tube is delivered, also cuts costs for the manufacturer. A dialogue between consumers and business, as well as governments, is needed. And hopefully we're helping with these interviews. But each of you listening today can reach out to companies and ask for better products and packaging. Ask for consistently recyclable materials or access to recycling services if they aren't locally available. Folks, environmental awareness and responsibility need to go mainstream. Would you take a few minutes to share this podcast by writing a review? You folks are the amplifier that can spread more ideas to create less waste. Tell your friends, family, coworkers, people you meet on the street that they can find Sustainability in Your Ear on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or other fine purveyors of podcast goodness. Thank you very much for your support and just for listening today. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.